Good morning, this is Jim Hennager. It's March 1st, 2016. I'm looking out the window here. The lake is starting to thaw out. It's been frozen for a month or so. You can see a pair of geese just down to the right. They've come back about a week ago, which is kind of early for the geese. Normally they aren't here till the middle of March. I've also seen some robins, which is kind of surprising that they're back early. So they left a couple weeks late and they've come back a couple weeks early. So I don't know what that foretells, but it does probably mean that we're going to see an early spring, which is fine with me. I'm not a winter person, and early spring is fine. Now we've seen some unusual weather this winter. It was 68 degrees last weekend, and then it dropped down to the 20s, and we had a couple inches of snow last night, but it looks like it's going to be back up into the 60s again this next weekend. So obviously some things are changing in the weather, and I've done some videos on global change, so you're welcome to look at those if you're interested. Today I would like to do what is probably going to be the last of the videos for the reentry program. This is a program where a few of us are putting together courses and videos for people that are going through life changes. I call it life in transition, and they're trying to come back into a normal society. They might be coming back from a military experience. They might be coming out of a prison and need to make some adjustments back into normal society. So that's the purpose of this video. All kinds of people are going through life changes, and in effect, I think all of us on a daily basis are experiencing changes that this video probably could help. Now, let me give you a little bit background of where I'm heading on this video. The other videos I've done in this series dealt with personal problem solving and long-range planning, looking for jobs, trying to figure out what you would like in your world. And today I'm titling it Brain Coding, Pathways to a Better Future. And I'm going to approach it on both an individual level and at the end probably on a societal level. I'm a sociologist. I look at the world from a sociological perspective. I'm not coming at this as a brain surgeon or a medical professional, clinical psychologist, none of those. I'm looking at this as a problem solver, a person who looks at social phenomena and tries to understand what's happening. I try to apply real facts and rational thinking and derive a conclusion. And the conclusion I've come to in this regard, you'll find it's going to be controversial like a lot of my other videos. And the controversy is necessary in my opinion. You know, people say, well, you shouldn't talk about things that aren't in the mainstream, but in my opinion, if you're dealing with the mainstream, you're 20 years or 40 years behind. The mainstream is that body of information that the mass media, the mass merchandisers, the corporate entities that want to control information put together to take care of their narrative, their perspective of the world. And quite honestly, in my research, particularly in my PhD, I looked at how things changed over 20-year time periods, back 100 years, and my discovery was that the professional planners, the people that wrote books on economic planning and community planning, city planning, they could not predict the future very well. I mean, less than 15-18% of what they were projecting ever came true. And when I read 100 years of a mainstream newspaper, They weren't any better. Their editorials, their news articles about the future were pretty much off all the time. The only genre that I really looked at that was very accurate, which is very interesting, is the genre of science fiction authors. When I looked at them over 100 years, it turned out that they were 75–80% accurate about what was coming in the next 20 years, and that was kind of eye-opening. I had never really gotten into science fiction authors before, and I was surprised, to be honest. Obviously, the science fiction writers that I looked at, people like Asimov, Arthur Clarke, Ray Bradbury, and Heinlein, were some of the best read, most books sold kind of authors in the 70s when I did my research. And they had, one foot in the future, and their science fiction, and their license to be creative, to not have any limits on their exaggeration of issues today. But they also had 1 foot in today. All these 4 men were professors. They all had PhDs. They all had, acceptance for writing nonfiction as well as fiction material. So it shouldn't be any surprise that these kind of authors could look at issues today and project them into the future, and they would not have been considered mainstream at all, but almost everything that they wrote about as far as issues and technology and things changing actually came true within 20 years for the most part, and you could see that develop over the 100 years that I looked at. So my opinion of the mainstream is, you're welcome to look at it. That's where the textbooks are. That's where our newspapers, nightly news, all of those bits of information are called mainstream. They're welcome to look at it, and they do provide information, but they're very biased. And one of the biases, they just do not consider anything out of the box, out of the mainstream, as being legitimate. And you see that in academia, which is very sad, because I know of professors who have been criticized and even fired for going into areas that are controversial and out of the box. That's too bad, because what it does is it puts a pressure on information, and it keeps the new ideas from coming out. And just to protect the narrative that's already changing doesn't make sense to me. So I prefer to look at issues as I see them coming at us, and try to relate how that impacts us today and how it's going to affect us as we move into the future. So that's what this video is about. It's looking at issues from a number of different perspectives. I try to get my students to look at issues from like a Rubik's Cube, looking at them from all the different sides, not just one side, not just one perspective. And I think that's important, because we have so many different perspectives on any issue today, and you can see that in the politics here in America for the next president. We have a wide divergence of individuals and their ideas running for president this time, and yet they're all in the mainstream. So it's kind of interesting that it's kind of falling out to some candidates that are very controversial in their own right, but they view their politics as non-traditional, and I would kind of view them as being outdated, to be quite honest. But anyway, we're not going to get into politics today, I hope. What I would like to emphasize is what I'm seeing happening with a number of my students in the last few years particularly. What I'm seeing is more and more students are experiencing what I would call rather difficult depressions and anxiety kind of situations. And I've even had veterans from Afghanistan and Iraq come to class with emotion dogs because they they couldn't handle going out of their home and being around people. They couldn't walk in the mall because they couldn't be comfortable with people walking up behind them and not being afraid. So that's one scenario of the kind of complexity that I see in young people, but I also am seeing people just coming through life. You know, they haven't been in a war zone, they haven't been in a prison, they just gone through normal everyday living, and they're experiencing some very deep anxieties. About half of my class this semester in sociology and social problems, half of them have no idea what they're going to major in or what direction they want to go in life. So that's an anxiety, and I can see it in their papers that they're trying to make sense out of what's happening. So to a certain extent, I'd like to go into this kind of analysis of what I'm seeing and what I would like to recommend as being some pathways to a better future for individuals as they might see it. But also on a broader level, I'd like to just talk about what I'm seeing as a civilization, as society. And I'm very concerned about us, to be quite honest. I think we're at a stage here in history where some things are coming together, and they're either going to go good or bad, in my opinion. Here we are on March 1st, 2016, and if you just look at the YouTube videos that are out there, there's a whole section of videos that are talking about pending doom, economic doom, and potential collapse of our economy globally. And we're seeing that happen. Just this last month, the Canadian dollar has dropped dramatically, and we're seeing them paying, over $10 for a gallon of milk, and $3 for a cucumber, and as much as $15 for a gallon of orange juice, $37 for a small steak. So that's a serious economic situation in Canada, and it would look like that's going to spread, because what we've created worldwide are economies based on fiat or paper money, credit. And like the United States, we're now 18, 19 trillion in debt because we've created, just made up money, basically, and not have balanced our budget. So something weird is going on. Why, smart people in banking are allowing that to happen. It doesn't make any sense why Congress here can't balance a budget, and they haven't for a decade. So where's all that money going? It's a good question of responsibility and what kind of effect that's having on the future economy. It just can't continue. Something's going to break here. And my guess is that we're going to see the stock market and the bond market collapse here again, like in 2008, maybe even worse. I'm seeing, professional people, economists, who are saying that we could see an 80% drop in the stock market here, maybe this month, March or April of this year. We're seeing the price of oil still staying way down. Canada is selling it for $10 a barrel. Saudi Arabia is selling it for less than $20 a barrel, and they say it's supply and demand, but that's not really the case. I think there's a lot of politics involved in this, and there's some deliberateness about keeping the price down to put pressure on certain governments such as Russia and Iran and China, and so it's playing out economically. I see that we have 350,000 troops on the border of Syria, 150,000 on Saudi side, and another 150 from the Turkey side. They're posed to move into Syria, and we have other countries like Iran and Russia who are saying, if that happens, it's World War III, and already we're seeing some of that going on in Syria. And any day now we could be getting news that the start of World War III is really what it amounts to, which you can't get any scarier than that. If you take a look at some of the earthquake and volcanic action going on, just this last weekend, a huge explosion of carbon monoxide and carbon dioxide came out of the ground in California all the way up to Canada on the west coast. This is many times a precursor to either giant earthquakes or volcanoes going off. It's gas coming from old volcanic action, and that would tell us that there's something coming here. Maybe in a few days, it may be in a month or years, but there's some volcanic action, possible in Yellowstone, which is one of the largest known volcanoes on our planet. And if that were to explode, that would be a tremendous catastrophe here, not in the United States alone, but around the world. And the kinds of earthquakes that would be associated with these kind of activities would be very dire. We're talking about possibility of a huge earthquake off of Portland and Washington State that would cause all kinds of problems, and huge tsunamis that would go across the Pacific Ocean all the way to Japan. And that apparently has happened in the last 200 years. So that's a dire kind of thing. We're getting information that there's the possibility of a huge earthquake here in the middle of the United States called the Madrid Fault, which is actually the largest known earthquake activity here in the United States. Back in 1810, I believe, we might have had a 9.2, 9.4 earthquake. And there's some evidence, birds dying and fish dying by the hundreds of thousands along that fault line. So there's obviously some dangerous gases coming out of that fault line as well. And, it's hard to predict those kinds of things, but it certainly would look like something's building geologically in both of those areas here in the United States. And there's similar activity in Southeast Asia and along the Rim of Fire around the Pacific Ocean. There's increasing activity. I have a student that's been following the number of earthquakes and volcanoes on a daily basis, and some days there's 300 or 400, both. Earthquakes and some major volcanoes are erupting, many of them underwater. So we have a lot of activity going, and obviously the climate is changing. Now we have this whole group of politicians that want to blame man for it entirely, but I think that's going to prove to be not the case. There's no doubt that we're adding pollution to the atmosphere and we're warming up the globe, but I think we're going to find out that the biggest causes of the weather changing are things that probably are out of our control, such as this increased activity in underwater volcanoes. There's something like 5,000 of them now underwater that are active, and that's heating up the oceans, in my opinion, a lot more than any man-made kind of activity. I'm a strong environmentalist. I believe humans should take responsibility for our Earth, and we should reduce pollution, and we should do recycling, and we should be sustainable in our energy. But I don't think it does us any good to blame the wrong variables. And I think the volcanoes and the earthquakes and also the sunspots, those are causing changes in our atmosphere, in our oceans, and we're seeing some of the warmest temperatures we've seen in a very long time. But I think we've seen them before. I think we've had Earth temperatures that probably averaged over 60 degrees, and we're at 58.4, I think, right now on an annual basis. I think we've seen temperatures above 60 before, and whenever that happened, we saw, the Antarctic and the Arctic ice and Iceland and Greenland ice all melt. That's raised the sea levels, at those times maybe 150 to 200 feet. I think that's happened a number of times. Researchers in Antarctica have dug down into the earth below the ice have found layers of evidence that would indicate that in the last 14 million years, the Antarctic ice has disappeared at least 60 times. So that means the Earth has warmed up and cooled off, and the ice has come, the seas have gone up, and the seas have gone down. And we're finding artifacts at the bottom of the Mediterranean, down 150 feet, some 200 communities that once were built there, and they didn't build them with water over top of them. At one time, the Mediterranean Sea was a valley, except for a river that went down it. So we had civilizations living there, and there's other places around the world that we see artifacts under 70 to 100 feet of water off of Japan, Southeast Asia, and the Pacific, the new civilization, and we still have the heritage or the narrative of the Atlantis civilization that probably was in the Atlantic someplace, the Mediterranean, which are called Eurasian or Assyrian population. We have a civilization off of India called the Dwarka, and some off of China called the Ur, and we don't find any of those civilizations in our textbook. So talk about mainstream being out of it. There's 5 civilizations I just gave you that have produced tremendous artifacts, and in some cases they had foundation stones that were 1,000 ton. We can't even move those kind of stones today, but we've had advanced civilizations here on Earth a number of times, and I think our Earth has gone up and down as far as being a blue zone planet and supporting life. And we've had a number of ice ages that would indicate that life has come and gone here on Earth before, and that's probably been going on for millions of years. I mean, to think that man has just been here for the last 40 or 50,000 years, Neanderthal bones are only evidence from about 45,000 years ago, and then Cro-Magnon started about 35,000 years ago, and the Neanderthal bones disappeared before the last ice age about 25,000 years ago, and the Cro-Magnon survived through the ice age, and it came down to the last Cro-Magnon bones appearing maybe about 10, 11, 12,000 years ago. So I don't want to get deep into those controversies, but I just want to urge you to look into these, because they're not in the mainstream press, they're not in the textbooks, they're not in our ancient history books, and you need to know this. They're keeping things from you on this regard because they don't want to take us away from the narrative of humans being exceptional or at the center of the universe. We're the beings that came in on a meteor and survived for millions of years and developed into 1.4 million species. That's the whole narrative, and at the top of that is humans, and we have to be praised, we have to be congratulated, we have to be ordained somehow as being special, being exceptional in the universe. And I saw an article in a very well-known magazine, Mainstream, just a week ago, where some scientists are saying the reason we haven't found intelligence out in the universe is that we're the only one that survived. That, in my opinion, is about the height of stupidity. In my lifetime, we've gone from an astronomy textbook saying we had 1.5 million stars in the universe to now, we're looking at 100 billion stars in our galaxy, and the potential of over 100 billion galaxies out there, and more coming every day in what we're discovering. But it looks like there may be new galaxies, new stars, new planets being developed in the universe every day, and it's just expanding. It's so hard to understand, to put wrap our minds around how big the universe is, and to think we're the only ones. That's stupid, to be real honest. We're not alone. There's millions and millions, probably billions of other life forms out there. Many of them are much older than we are, maybe by millions of billion years. They're more advanced, and it calls into question, what does it mean for our civilization? Have we reached the top level of how far we can advance before we destroy ourselves. That's kind of how I'm looking at it. I've gotten into how I look at different civilizations right here on Earth. I see that we're in level 5, and that means we're into mass production and mass marketing and mass communication and mass stupidity in some cases. Because of the way we're using technology, we're obviously using it to better, and we probably extended life medically by the technologies, but at the same time we're also reducing life and creating all kinds of cancers and diseases that are shortening life, particularly after you get into your 50s and 60s, because of the chemicals that we're using or misusing, and because of the pollution that we have in the air. It just is obvious that we've reached a level where we have to make some choices, and one of those choices is to change into a civilization that what I would call a level 6 civilization that is concerned about non-zero sum kinds of ideals, where everybody accepts the responsibility for the globe, or responsible for the environment, we're responsible for the oceans, we're responsible for all of the species. We need to take care of everybody somehow. There's enough food and water for everybody, but politically we just aren't allowing that to happen. We have maybe half the people on this 7 billion populated planet that are going to bed hungry. Millions of them dying, millions of kids under 5 that are dying from malnutrition. We're not doing very well, to be real honest, in level 5, and I don't think we're going to get to level 6 unless we change how we look at economics, change how we look at politics, change how we look at the individual. Okay, and one of those changes is to outgrow some of the religious ideas that we have that we're exceptional because God placed us here. The creation story where we're special because God put us in the Garden of Eden. That's a narrative, a religious narrative that is kind of cute, but it's sort of like Santa Claus. It's not really reality. The second thing that we've developed is a story of evolution, which is almost like the story of creation, in that it has a whole lot of elements of faith there that you just have to believe, or it doesn't make any sense. And I really don't want to get into all of those kinds of arguments today, but to be honest, the evolution of species, it probably takes place, but I don't think it's happened here on Earth. I see real facts, real evidence from geologists and people that studied the ice and the ground under the Antarctica and many places. Our history goes back millions of years, and there's probably been many, many civilizations that have come and gone, or come and died here as a result of some of the calamities that have happened. We're looking at a meteor coming in, March 7th, that's 100 feet wide, and if it would happen to get caught in our gravity and collide with us, it might destroy half of the population here on Earth. And worse than that is, this huge controversy coming at us called Planet X, which the mainstream hasn't even been willing to touch. But, there's building evidence that there's another sun and planetary system that goes through our solar system at a different angle every 3,000, 4,000 years, or maybe 20,000 years. Who knows? It's out there, and it's influencing the gravity and the electromagnetic kinds of things in our solar system, and that may be in fact causing the earthquakes and volcanoes that we're seeing on our planet right now. And if it comes within millions of miles of it, it's going to do a lot of damage. So we're living in some very trying times, and if you kind of look at these issues, it's not too hard to get very depressed, to be real honest. I have asked my students in classes, courses this semester, and I have about 100 students, to look into these kinds of issues, and most of them, it's called dissidence. You just want to separate your thinking from these kinds of facts that are coming, and reject them. And a lot of people just are not prepared for anything new to happen, let alone something that would be catastrophic and dire. So we have all those kinds of things coming at us. We have, the possibility of a pandemic coming at us. It's long overdue from what medical researchers are saying. So that's scary too. And we have a new mosquito-borne kind of disease that's going around right now. And, it's drawing a lot of attention to the possibility of humans getting wiped out by some pandemic. So I don't want to emphasize these kind of negatives, but we have plenty of things to worry about in our existence every day. So I think it's important to look at how to deal with not just those, but everyday kinds of things. How are you going to pay for your rent? How are you going to get your car to work today? How are you going to find a job if you don't have one? Those are real problems, and they affect us just as much as worrying about if Planet X is flying too close to us here, and people predicting it's going to, pass us March 25th. So that's this month. So I hope I can look back at this video in 10 years or 20 years, or my grandkids can look at it, and we can all have a good laugh that, that was all a hoax. I hope it is, but there's a lot of things that aren't hoaxes, and I think you need to deal with them to feel comfortable about where you're at and who you are today. Okay, so that's kind of the background. You can see that I'm kind of on the controversial end of the spectrum, because I don't believe that humans got here by creation or by evolution. I think we were designed by more advanced civilizations that probably are millions of years older than us. And their job is sort of caretaker. They watch for planets that go down because of an ice age or catastrophe. They wait till it's supportive of new life, and they bring them in big motherships and replant civilizations all through our galaxy, all through the university. I think there are level 8, level 9 civilizations out there that not only are caretakers, but they most likely designed us. Now that creates a whole new perspective of who we are, if you're willing to look at that, instead of, we're here by God's grace, and we're special to God, or because we've evolved over a million years, and we're at the top of the pole, so to speak. That gets you into thinking we're special, that we're exceptional, and that we can't really do too much with where we're at. But I don't buy any of that. I think we've been brought here, and whether we're successful as a civilization is up to us. And we've probably been given some interesting tests to see if we're capable of surviving. And some we may not be able to survive. There's pandemics that could wipe us out. There's World War III that could wipe us out. There's Planet X that could wipe us out. There's earthquakes and volcanoes that could wipe us out. So we have those kind of challenges, but on a day-to-day basis, we also have challenges. And to accept that, we're here because, we're at the top of the evolutionary chain is limiting. It really limits us as to what our potential is, and how we look at problems, for example. So my approach here is that the human body, the human mind, has been created by some very advanced civilizations, some specialists in the biochemical genetic areas, and they have designed an organism that's pretty well designed, okay? I think we could probably do much better in both the physical and mental areas if we would accept the fact that we need to back engineer our bodies and minds to understand how it was designed and how it functions. And we're completely missing, that whole perspective when we're assuming that, we've evolved to this point, when actually we probably came here with some of those characteristics that would allow us to take care of our own body and take care of our own mind and be healthy. Now, I know that's controversial. You can accept it or reject it. You don't have to accept it to take this as a course. I'd urge you to investigate, come up with your own opinion on how this works. But for me, that's the perspective I'm taking. So when I look at more and more students going to psychologists or psychiatrists and being given prescription drugs that are very dangerous, when I see returning veterans that coming back and going to the VA and being prescribed all kinds of drugs. I've had one student that was probably 24 years old. He'd been prescribed 19 different prescription drugs to handle his depression and anxiety. Now, you can take this any way you want to, but I think that's stupid. I think we're moving in a direction that doesn't make sense. And to have people thinking that the only time that they're healthy is if they're on prescription drugs, that's insane. We've actually reversed what it means to be healthy, because I would assume that you're healthy if you're not taking any drugs, prescription drugs or illegal drugs or recreational drugs or over-the-counter drugs at all. I think if I assume your body has been put together to take care of itself, why would you want to be destroying itself by taking foreign substances and causing damage inside? Okay, so you can see that I'm heading in a direction that's counterintuitive to what the mainstream is asking you to do today, but I see it everywhere. I see the Americans are the most overprescribed people on this planet. We're now seeing that the third cause of death for people over 65 is drug interaction and drug overdose. The average 65 is on 10 different prescription medications from 3 different doctors. That doesn't make any sense at all. And they're interacting, and that's what's causing people to die in their sleep, or from infectious kind of things that are developing because their immune system is completely down. All of the prescription drugs take your immune system down. And we're not realizing that without an immune system, your body's vulnerable to anything. So I have gotten into this in other videos, and I'm just suggesting that we look at our body as an organism that was well designed, and we need to figure out how it works. Okay, so that's where I'm heading. But when we're looking at how individuals are dealing with the problems and the anxiety and the depression, and we're seeing veterans here in the United States, I think it's now averaging 23 veterans a day are committing suicide. That's tragic. And it's not just the young veterans coming from Afghanistan and Iraq. The majority of these people are Vietnam veterans. They're in their 50s, 60s, and their worlds are coming apart on them. Their marriages have come apart. They've lost their jobs. They've lost their homes. They're living on the street in many cases, and they just give up and commit suicide. That's tragic. Okay, it's also tragic that we have young veterans who might be taking 2 or 3 different kind of very strong prescription medicines, and they're interacting to cause deeper depression and suicidal kinds of depression, almost to the point where some of these veterans don't realize whether the value of being alive or not. Okay, so I blame the medicine. I blame the approach we're taking, and I think it's to benefit the pharmaceutical companies. It's to benefit the medical narrative you have here in the Western world, and particularly here in America, to make money. I think the better answer is to look at it in a way to increase the immune system, to increase the the important chemicals that your body needs that aren't prescription drugs. They're potassium and niacin and magnesium and iron and, the kind of things we get in food, natural food. So I'm approaching this, from a different direction, and I hope you understand that there's importance in looking at things different. Okay, so if we look at it from a sociological perspective, here I have my imaginary pop-up three-dimensional computer. Okay, so here's the computer screen, and on here I'm going to draw a figure. I'll call him George. He's a stick person, and around him I'm going to draw concentric circles. Now this in sociology we call socialization. So the first circles around George are the influence that are coming from his parents, his siblings, his brothers and sisters, his friends, his school, his teachers, maybe his religious leaders, and it just keeps going out farther and farther till all these things are influencing how you perceive the world. Okay, but there's a two-way street because they're influencing you, and sociologists could look at it from a conflict point of view, that there's always certain groups trying to influence you to buy things, to buy into things, to be party of one political group or another, or to belong to a religious group or another. There's always those kind of influences coming at you, but also it's how you read that influence coming at you. So it's a two-way street. It's sort of like how we look at art. You got to have two or three people look at the same piece of art, and the aesthetics of that communication between the object and a person interpreting it could get three different results. I mean, three different people are going to see the same painting completely different, and that's what happens in real life. People can go through some really devastating kind of early childhood experiences and come out of it, a super athlete, a super musician, a super artist, because they took it as a challenge. And another person goes through the same set of experiences, and they get down on themselves and down on the world, and they become, something less than ideal. So it's a two-way street. Now, if you looked at that pattern, and it seemed pretty normal, all the circles seemed, to kind of fit together, and you compared it to, Sam over here, another stick person, and the circles aren't, very comfortable. They're erratic, and they go in and out. That's abnormal. And your socialization can be sort of to the norm, which is, different cultures have different norms, and what one society thinks is okay, another one might not, and we have that here in the United States. Some states allow you to use marijuana, and others don't, so that's the kind of difference. We have states that allow prostitution, and some that don't, or most don't, to be quite honest, so there's a difference in the norm. And when you come over here to the abnormal kind of experiences, they're going to be more profound. They're going to be situations like children growing up in homes that have alcoholism or drug abuse or physical abuse. We're seeing children coming into adulthood that have come through some very, very nasty backgrounds, even to the point of being locked in closets, locked in the basements, not being fed, physically abused, sexually abused. Those are abnormal kinds of things that happen to people, and they have influences on how you look at the world. So that's socialization, if you can follow. And as a sociologist, we would either look at it from a conflict point of view or a structural function. How are the laws affecting us? How are the policies affecting us? Or maybe we're looking at it as a behavioralist to understand, this series of events kind of creates a scrapbook of memories and influences on us. So those are the ways sociologists would look at it. A psychologist probably would look at it in terms of, what's happening to the mental activity, and how are those kind of influencing characteristics influencing behavior. Okay, so, but I'm not coming at that as a strictly sociologist or strictly a psychologist today, But I would like to get down to the level where we see what might be happening in a person's brain. Okay. Now, I don't think you're going to find this in mainstream. I've never seen it in textbook, but it's not mine original thinking here. This is ideas that are developing just outside of mainstream. But for a long time, in the 70s and 80s, we had, people thought of the brain as sort of a mystery black box, and that's gone back thousands of years. Nobody really kind of understood what was happening there. But by the 70s, 80s, we were starting to see diagrams of the brain where we had different sections. This one was for speech, and this one was for color, and this was for social responsibility, and those kinds of things. By the 90s, we started seeing diagrams where we saw different parts of the brain having different functions. This part of the brain dealt with cognitive kind of things, and this one dealt with more abstract kind of things, and we got into this right brain, left brain kind of idea, which probably isn't real at all, because I think where we're going on this is that the brain acts like one whole organism. Okay, and for a long time we thought that there was sort of a coding process going in there that might be binary, like our computers. Now, if you've had a class in Intro to Computing, you might understand that a binary gives you a coding where A might be a plus plus, and B might be plus minus, and C might be plus minus minus. Do you follow? And as you run it through a computer electronically very quickly, you can code it in. Letters make words, and words make sentences and descriptions. But also you can bring the electricity back out and read it, in the pulses that are coming off of the processing equipment. Okay, so in a binary, you have pretty much straight line kind of coding, and it's made fast because we have some kind of protein energy that's going through our brain, and it's a good question. You see people say, well, we're not probably using more than 5 or 10% of our brain, but I know students who, when they're really studying, they probably would say, they're pretty close to 100%. Their brain hurts after studying. So I don't know exactly how much of the brain we're using. I doubt that we're close to any of its capacity, because what we're looking at are coding going on not just in the trillions and trillions of cells, but each cell could have tens of thousands of molecules. So you could have molecules lining up and creating code, okay? So we know that we have different ways that we see the world. I mean, we have our 5 senses, but let's just take the world of seeing it, from our eyes. Our eyes have like 400,000 sensors on the back of them, and those sensors depict things like color variations and movement and shadings. Those kind of sensors are on the back of the eye, and they go to nerves that go into a processing area of the brain, and in that processing center, it's taking, kind of like a color TV, it's giving you a screen eye view of whatever you're looking at. Now, it's probably not recording all of that. I mean, you're looking at, hundreds of thousands of things anytime you're looking out in the world, and you're probably only attracted to certain kinds of things, like maybe a color or, a shape or something that your mind might even register. So it's not picking up everything, and I don't really believe that you're recording everything you see or hear or touch permanently. So we have sort of a short-term memory and a long-term memory, I guess you'd call it. And we're scanning, we're bringing in this information. You start hearing somebody talking to you, that's a speech. You recognize the words, you decode them into, what they're saying to you, and it goes through this processor, and then from the processor it goes to an area that kind of indicates some value to it. And we don't realize that it's so important that at night your brain has to have some time to process things. Your brain probably works harder at night than it does during the day, because it has to take everything from this processing center in the short term and code it out into areas that are similar patterns of thoughts. So this area of cognitive dissonance where if you bought a new red car, all of a sudden all the cars you see, for a while are red cars because your mind is emphasizing that. The value of that particular variable has come up and you're seeing red cars. So I think there's a part of your brain that's related to red cars, okay? But when it goes out to that part that's associating with red cars, you might also be associating with the color red in other areas. It might be red hair or red shoes or red on the flag. See, so the mind is coded as it associates information. And instead of, you have different parts of the brain doing different things, I think it probably functions as an entire unit, and it goes out there and stores information in associated files, if you wanted to call it that, okay? So you have a file for things red, and you have a file for things blue, and you have a file out there for snow. And here in Iowa, I look at snow, and it's 2 or 3 different kinds of snows. But in Alaska, a native Indian up there, they might see 100 different kinds of snow. So related to your environment, related to your experiences, and how things come to you, it gets coded into your brain by association. Okay, so I don't believe it's binary. In the last few years, we're hearing more and more about quantum computing. And in a quantum computer, it's not binary. It's tertiary or, multiples. And instead of it, being a straight line program, like in linear programming, at one time we had wires and they crossed, and that was the core magnet at each intersection. And now it's, more molecular electronic kind of coding on the binary, but it's still straight lines. Straight lines coming in, straight lines coming out. But you move to quantum computing, and you're talking about information going out in clusters. So you have this cluster and this cluster and this cluster, and then the pattern of how that moves from one thought to another becomes how we think. And the brain has that capacity to move that information around, and it doesn't just go out like a computer and store it and then wait till you call it up again. It actually goes out and deals with that information that you've gotten. Sometimes more reflective than others. Sometimes it's just passed over and forgotten. But the brain has the ability to just go on and on and on about that association of thoughts. I think a lot of the thought patterns that develop in this coding, in these clusters, you have, molecules being attached from all different sides by this information, and it's an energy, it's a protein energy that's coming through there, and it's connecting those molecules from all different sides. The cells are being connected from all different sides, so it's not binary. It's much more complicated than that, and it's probably much more efficient. It's very fast. I think your brain probably goes, what I've read, 3,000 times faster than I'm talking, which is sort of the speed of a quantum computer. They're estimating that it's much, much faster, and it's because it's not linear. It's not binary. And it's going out and it's going to these clusters and it's going back and forth to figure out if this is the area that it wants to deal with. And in many cases, I think it develops into a circular path. Do you follow? And how your brain works has a lot of variables. Okay? So before I get into how these circular patterns of thinking are influencing people to be depressed or anxious or suicidal, let me just hint that there are other kinds of variables going on here. For example, your brain has, I believe, 110 different glands in it, and each one of them produces a different chemical compound. So you can have tears of joy and tears of fear and just tears, and they all have different chemical compositions because they're coming from different glands in your brain, okay? So pretty much all of the kind of emotional feelings you have and maybe the speed that this organism is operating at has an awful lot to do with how well those glands are working, okay? It is a biochemical organism, okay? It's not a computer, it's not wires, and it's not machinery. This is cellular kind of structures that are formed and reformed and growing all the time. So if your glands aren't producing the chemicals that are needed, then the brain isn't working just right, okay? And now, one of the ways that that's happening, and it's kind of interesting that our mainstream wants to talk about Americans, the leading cause of death in America is heart attacks, but it really isn't. The leading cause of death in the United States is something called heart events. Now, the heart attack is a situation where there's a blockage, a blood clot, or a rupturing of vessels or veins someplace, and it affects the heart, and you have an attack, and everything stops. But actually, the majority of deaths by heart events have nothing to do with high cholesterol or blood pressure or those kind of events. They happen usually in the morning to somebody over 65 who just doesn't wake up. And we saw that in a Supreme Court justice just a few weeks ago. Okay, it happens. A majority of heart deaths, heart events, are by the brain not telling the heart to continue. Okay, so something's happened in the chemical composition of what's actually the medulla, part of the brain that gives off these signals to your heart, and it's telling your heart to beat, 60 times, 70 times a minute. It's also telling your lungs to breathe. Okay, and right next to it is an endocrine gland, one of these glands in your brain that's putting serotonin into your medulla to get you to relax so you can fall asleep at night. It does it at one level, and then it does it at another level, and you get deeper and deeper into sleep by the chemicals coming out of the endocrine gland into the medulla. Okay, do you follow what I'm suggesting? Now, there could be all kinds of things that could cause the endocrine gland to malfunction and the medulla to malfunction, okay? For example, your brain is made up of 70-80% water. If you're dehydrated, those are some of the glands that don't work as best as they can, okay? We have 30-40% of Americans that are partially dehydrated. They're not drinking enough water. Okay? Now, I've harped about this on the other videos, but this isn't what mainstream medicine wants you to think about. They want you to take an aspirin a day. They want you to take their high cholesterol medicine. They want to take your high blood pressure medicine because they make money doing it. But really, what's happening is most Americans don't drink enough water to keep the brain working well. Okay, if you're not drinking 5 or 6 glasses of water, then your brain could be in trouble. There's glands up there that won't work, but there's also glands in the rest of your body that won't work, and it could affect your entire immune system. Dehydration is a major problem. I've had a number of students that have basically fainted at their job, or in one case she was a cheerleader and fainted while she was cheering, and of course they think there's a brain tumor or brain cancer or something like that, but in every case it's turned out that they were dehydrated. They weren't drinking enough water, and they weren't getting the right nutrition. Some of these students are trying to live on potato chips and yellow colored pop. That's not doing it for them. They're not getting the kind of water. It also turns out that we're not getting the nutrition that we need, and there's maybe 60 basic chemicals in our environment that our body needs. And they're not prescription medicine, they're not over-the-counter drugs, and they're not illegal drugs. They're 60 base chemicals, and they're iron and niacin and potassium and iodine. These are the kind of chemicals that your body needs to have your glands work right in your body. That's your immune system, as well as in your brain. Those glands need these kind of chemicals. They take the chemicals and they create compounds. That's where your amino acids come from, that's where your proteins come from, and that's the energy that you have in your brain. If your brain's not working because it doesn't have adequate water, or adequate nutrition, or adequate sleep, your brain's going to be in a fog. Okay? It's as simple as that, and that's a factor in what I see so many of these young students, and older people for that matter, facing depression and anxiety. Something's not working in their brain, and I'm guessing that it has to do with the amount of water they're drinking, the amount of sleep they're getting, and the amount of nutrition. It could also have to do with constipation, to be real honest. It's a delicate area, but 30-40% of Americans are either partially or full constipated. And keeping those chemicals in your body that are, due to go out, that causes all kinds of problems in your body. And I think a lot of people that have migraines and headaches all the time, that's reflected in those sets of natural kinds of things that you need to do for your body. Okay, so I'm saying, I think your brain and your body were well designed to take care of themselves, and if you would do the kinds of things you need to do, like drink water and have proper nutrition and proper exercise and proper sleep and drinking enough water, then I think the brain and your body would function very well, certainly within a normal range of most people being successful at living day to day. Okay, now you can get outside of that norm because you could have genetic things happen, and we're seeing that more and more. They're saying now that maybe a third of all cancers are genetically related. I don't think that's a true connection, because I think what's happening is that we're having chemical things, pollutants, come into our body, and those chemical pollutants are affecting the genetics. Are you following? I think the genetics probably were okay by themselves for the most part. It's the chemicals we're getting in our foods. It's the chemicals we're getting in our waters. It's the chemicals we're breathing. Take a look at Flint, Michigan. They've gone years now with polluted water, and the iron content in kids is raising, and they're seeing all kinds of mental problems, anxiety and depression in these kids and older people. I remember a community in northeast Iowa that had such a high nitrate content one time that they had to warn people under 5 and over 65 not to drink the water because of the nitrogen. And it turned out it was coming from a chicken factory right in the city limits. Okay, so we've been kind of stupid about this, and we've allowed the chemical industry and the pharmaceutical companies to grow to a point where they want to sell us a narrative that they can make us, healthy. But in fact, I think they're causing a lot of problems. So genetically, you can have some things happen to you, and there's a packet in every cell that has DNA and RNA components to it, and if something happens to that packet in one cell and it doesn't reproduce itself, and cells are constantly reproducing themselves, if that's not happening, then you're going to have some problems. Okay, so genetically you can have some issues, but I think they're as often related to chemical issues or errant electricity or radiation. If you're standing in front of a radar oven or a microwave and you're feeling a tingle in your arm, you probably get a tingling in your brain, and it's probably affecting some of those cells as well. But we also have errant electricity that just, we have electromagnetic energy flowing in a room, and I've gone around and tested, some of the mobile phones, cell phones that we have, and some of them just screech with electromagnetic energy coming off of them. And, most of Europe doesn't allow children under 15 to even use cell phones because of that danger. But here we have special interest groups that want to sell smartphones, And so we allow, 11 and 12-year-olds to be on the phone for hours and hours, and it's probably affecting how their brain works. There's just no way to get around that. So genetics and, the pollutant kinds of things that are coming from our environment are factors. I think that they're affecting how the brain works. I hear a lot of students say they feel like they're living in a fog, and it's maybe marijuana, but it's probably a combination of not having enough water, and people that are dehydrated faint. They just topple over. So I think you have to appreciate that there are exterior kinds of things that influence your brain as well as genetic things that could be happening. And I think sometimes that gets tragic, because I had a friend in graduate school, a very, very bright student, but her mother had some genetic mental illness, and because the daughter had to basically take care of her until she died, she just was not going to get married. She was not going to have any children and put them through that. But she really had no evidence, and I don't believe she ever had the same thing happen to her in her adult life. So she was making decisions, very big decisions, based on assumptions of genetics. And so I don't think it's fair to say that genetics is 1/3 of our problem in cancers. I think it's probably 2 or 3%, and the other percents come from pollutions that are affecting genetics, affecting our cells. We can also have physical damage, and we're seeing that. There's a movie now dealing with football players that have concussions. There's just no doubt that you can damage your brain. I mean, if you slam it up, it's going to bounce off of one side of your skull and then bounce off the other side, and it's going to do damage, And I think we really need to look at, some of these programs where we have in second, third graders playing football, and I know that's controversial, but my projection would be that someday we're going to outlaw that. It's just going to be banned. It's just not a safe environment because all it takes is one hit or one falling to the ground and your brain could be damaged for the rest of your life. Okay? I think we're seeing that in professional football players. We've certainly seen that in professional boxers. I think you got to be nuts to get in the ring and let somebody bounce these gloves off your head. They're doing it for money or fame or something, but they're nuts. Okay? I was an athlete in high school. I played football. I remember falling and getting hit a number of times. I was a wrestler and wrestled in college for a year, and I got hit quite hard by other wrestlers who deliberately tried to bang their head against you to make you a little dizzy. I remember working on a farm one summer, and a corn fork came off a hook and hit me in the back of the head. Luckily, it wasn't the sharp end; it was the back end. I remember one time doing some plumbing with my dad in the basement, and a big pipe wrench came off and hit me right here in the forehead. So maybe I have some brain damage, and maybe that's why I look at the world, from different perspectives, because I'm damaged upstairs. But that is a factor, and I think as humans we have to learn how to protect that cage we call the head much more than we are, because you just hate to have a lifetime of malfunctioning brain because of things that we could have prevented. Okay, so I know that's controversial, and over time I think we're going to have to look at that. Physically, you can damage the brain. There's also some evidence that there could be some of the things that we call mental diseases, like paranoid schizophrenia, that are related to physiological changes in the brain. For example, some paranoid schizophrenics have a brain that's shrinking, and as it shrinks around the middle ear, it creates a zone there for noise to be created, and so the voices that a paranoid schizophrenic might hear may actually be just the air resonating around the middle ear because the brain is shrunk. Now, in aging, we also see that the brain shrinks, the mass decreases, particularly in some parts of the brain. So there's a physical deterioration going on there that's caused by aging in some cases, or some kind of influence to the brain. And so there's all those kind of variables. So if you take all of those and kind of try to understand that you could have those kind of things influencing you, I would like you to come down in this video to how things are being coded. Okay, so those are the things that I think you can control. Some of these others, they just happen. And you can avoid pollution, you can avoid air and electricity, you can avoid radiation, you can avoid, having brain injuries, hopefully. But most things just happen to us and we have to deal with them. But how your brain is coded, I think that's an area that's your responsibility. And what's happening is that people are allowing the sociological kinds of things to influence them, just to put the coding in there, the associated thoughts, the association of events, the association of concepts. They're coming in there kind of random. And not just kind of, I think they are random in many people, maybe most people. I can tell how a student thinks by reading their paper, and if they're well organized and they've looked at a lot of different things and brought it together, that looks to me like a well-functioning brain operating. Okay, if they just approach it like, I don't know, which is kind of typical, their brain hasn't been organized, their brain hasn't been structured, their brain hasn't been trained how to think. Okay, and it's my opinion that many of the people that are emotionally and anxious and depressed and suicidal are people that haven't trained their brains in how it's coded. They just let things happen. They don't deliberately try to build patterns of associated thought that are functional. I think we have a whole continuum of how the brain functions, whether it's functional or not. Down here at one end, I think people just, it's just like that kind of thinking. They're rattled, they're just bouncing all over. And there's no real structure or, going from point A to point B, no rationality in some of these brains. And I think these people have the most likely a tendency to get depressed and anxious. Now you move up the scale and you find that the average person probably has, some structure in there, but a lot of ambiguity as well. And you get up here to the end, and you probably get into people that have highly structured, highly functional brains. Now, I'm assuming that if they're highly functional, that they're not being depressed or anxious or suicidal. And I don't know if that bears out, because I know some very smart people that have committed suicide, and we've had some here in the last year. So you have to question what was going on in their circumstances, either physically or physiologically, to get them into a trap where their association was going around and around in a circular pattern to a point that caused them to basically give up on life, or in some cases to be very depressed or very anxious. Okay, so I'm not sure it's IQ involved. I'm not sure it's that the smartest people are the most immune to being depressed or anxious, but I think as they are able to structure their brain, they become better problem solvers. Does that make sense? If you're a good problem solver, no matter what comes at you, and the best way I try to describe it to my students is, if you're dealing with a circular path in your mind that's all negative, you get up and you say, well, it's going to be a bad day, I should go back to bed, nobody wants to talk to me, I don't think I want to go to school today, it's going to be a bad day, I just better go back to bed, and that's a circular path, and they don't get out of bed. A lot of depressed people don't get out of bed. I've had students that, I'm sorry I missed the last 2 weeks, I just couldn't get out of bed. Okay, so that's that loop, and it's always negative. And if it gets worse and worse, it gets to the point where there's no way for that person to tell the difference between being alive and being dead. In some cases, I don't think they deliberately choose to to commit suicide. It's just they don't see the difference anymore. So it's an easy choice for them in some cases. But to get them off of that circular path, I've again and again said that you have to do some deliberate structuring, deliberate programming, deliberate coding. This is the brain coding I'm getting at, to get them off of that circular path. Are you following me? I think we have all kinds of circular thinking, and in some cases I think it's okay. When you learn to play the piano, at first it's very difficult because you don't have, the hand-mind coordination, but as you get more familiar, as you learn songs, that is a circular path. It's a rote memory kind of thing that you can go back in your brain and you can play the piano or you can play the trombone. I haven't played the trombone for maybe 45 years, but I was in a jazz band in college and a jazz band in high school. I think I could pick up a trombone and play the first 8 bars of 76 trombones without too much hesitation, because there's a circular path up there that has it already programmed. Okay? I think that's how we kind of live most of our life. It's those little circular paths that have us brush our teeth from the same side, starting on, every day, shaving from the same side, taking the same path to work every day, buying food in a grocery store in the same pattern, and we go to a different grocery store, we're lost. That's pattern thinking. That's circular thinking. We get used to a pattern and we feel comfortable with it. We don't want to get out of those circular paths sometimes. Okay, but I'm saying that a very functional brain, one that can problem solve and can look at new issues and get you through the day, is one that can divide it out and it starts looking like a softball tournament. You got all these brackets, you got options, and in our brain we can actually put values on these options, so that maybe we're looking at what to do Friday night, and we decide that we want to go to a movie, or we want to see a movie, and we want to have a date, and we want to go to dinner, but we only have $12. That limits the options. But it gives us a path, So we probably going to, watch a movie on TV and order in a pizza, So we've answered the problem, okay? So I think if you have a functional brain, that's how your brain works. It sets up problems. It looks at options. It puts values on which one, you can accomplish, or which one's going to cost the most, or which one's going to be the farthest away, or which one is going to be the most beneficial to you tomorrow. You have different values, different ways of evaluating options, and that's how that brain works. It looks at options, it looks at the values, and you can see clusters of different areas that might have merit, and you move towards those options. Okay, that's functional thinking. That's having coding in there that's actually going to benefit you. Okay, and I think you can structure the brain. No matter how old you are, you can have gazillion codes for life, but I think you can, at any age, create new code. I don't think you can erase the old code in many cases, but I think it becomes less important to you if you can move in some new directions. And I think people can move in new directions at any age. Okay, I know some people in their 80s that are very essence of being dynamic. They're taking classes, they're doing new art things, they're exercising, and they're all kinds of things. Okay, so it's not an age problem. It's just the ability and the willingness, the commitment to keep your mind open to new ideas, to having new coding in there all the time. So I call that learning. That's what I want my students to do. I want them to be able to look at issues and come up with all the different perspectives like a Rubik's Cube, and come up with different options and pick out an option, put values on it, and make decisions. That's a functional brain. That takes coding. That takes, programming into yourself, okay? So there's several things that I think a person can do that's depressed or anxious. And I've had students that have come back to me after years and tell me that they've gone through the roller coaster in life, up and down, and they've had some really bad times, and they were at the rope's end. even to the point of thinking about suicide. But in the one case, she was maybe in her 30s, lost her job. She very good student when she was in there, dropped out of school. She had gotten to the bottom, and something popped into her head from one of my classes where I said that people, weren't drinking enough water. Just a simple little idea. So she had never drank water. 10 years had gone by where she had never deliberately drank water other than, coffee or to swallow pills. She was being treated by a psychiatrist. She had several prescriptions. She was also on marijuana. So she had all kinds of things going on chemically in her brain that were probably not helping her depression and her anxiety. But so she decided to try, and she just, this is like coming off the circular path. And she started drinking some water. She started exercising, walking every day. She decided to eat more healthy foods, and the combination of those allowed her to sleep better at night. She hadn't been sleeping very well. So when those things kind of became new habits for her, she found that she didn't need the prescription medicine. And she ended up going off of all of that, and eventually gave up on the marijuana, the pot, even gave up cigarette smoking. And what she told me was, thanks for giving my life back to me. It was that dramatic, and it was just those little things that got her off of the paths that she was circular thinking on, to give her, a chance to try some new things. So she did the natural kind of things: the water, the nutrition, the sleep, the exercise, and they worked. So that would be one thing that I would recommend to anybody that's down, depressed. You need to go back to the basics, okay? You need to get into some new habits in those areas, and it really is telling your body you care. You give a damn about yourself, okay? I think the body knows that in a way. Your mind knows that you're doing the right thing, okay? So then when you're feeling better and you're not in a fog, then I think you can, maybe take classes and try some new things in life, and maybe do some traveling, meet some new people, try a different job. Maybe it means you have to move away from the spouse or the friend that you're having that's causing you problems. You need to move off into some new things, okay? Get your mind thinking about some new coding is what it amounts to, okay? And if you're doing some new things and they're rewarding to you, I think you're going to start feeling better about yourself, and the depression will go, the anxiety will go, and you'll be in a better position to make decisions, problem solve, designing things, okay? And it sounds simple, but I know it's not. It takes a while, and it's not going to happen like a light switch where you click it on and off, and all of a sudden one day you're up and happy. But I think taking the little steps, moving in some new paths, developing new habits, meeting new people, meeting new challenges, getting to solve problems on your own, and being independent are critical to getting out of the fog, getting out of that depression. And if you can do those things, I think, given some time, you're going to come back to being a valuable human being. Okay, I don't think you're contributing too much to society when you're sitting around moping around and complaining, whining. We got plenty of those people. The problem is they get around. They're all over the place. Okay, I would urge you to move into some new thinking that's positive, that's functional, and it's beneficial to you. Okay, and I think you can do that. What I have a conflict with is that in our modern practices of medicine and psychology, we want to change that coding from the outside. The pharmacist wants to give you a drug that's going to dull your mind or excite your mind or do something, but it's chemically altering your mental processes. For one, I don't think that's good. I think that can be destructive as well as helpful in the short term, but in the long term, I think it's addictive. And we see all kinds of evidence of people being addicted to painkillers and psychiatric medicine that they can never get away from. Okay? And the other side of it is that in the psychiatry narrative, they think that they can coach you from the outside to changing something internally. Now you might say, well, that's not any different than what I'm proposing, that you change how you're looking at the world. But it is, because it's coming from within you, not outside you. Now, I think counselors and psychologists, they can be helpful, just like a minister can be helpful, just like religion can be helpful to some. But it's coming from the outside. And so I think it's very important that it has to come from inside. It has to be a deliberate decision, a deliberate commitment on your part to change the coding, change the association of thoughts, change the events in your mind. Okay? And you don't have to be happy or anything like that to change, but you just have to restructure your brain and add some new things up there that are positive. Do you follow? Does that make sense? Okay, so I'm not trying to give the medical, the pharmaceutical, or the professional counselors too bad a time, but I think their model is based on how much money they can make, to be honest, okay? And I think if you would just do some self-educating, some self-stimulus to try some new things, you can get out of depression, you can get out of anxiety, you can get out of thinking suicide, okay? But there's some negative loops there that you got to be careful of, because one of them is, falling in love with somebody and you're just not realistic about it. You can't see anything negative about a person. That's a negative loop, and it can get you into trouble. If you're into some kind of addiction, whether it's sex addiction or abuse addiction or chemical addiction, that's a negative loop, and your brain just goes round and round on that loop. You got to get off of those kinds of loops. And I think you can be negative as you communicate to people. I think you can be sort of the downer person at work, or the negative person, or the griping person, or the whiner. Those are negative loops, and I think they don't really benefit you too much. I think it helps to be positive, to look at the world positive, to take problems on and be realistic about them, because sometimes there's going to be problems that you can't solve today. You may not be able to solve it in the next 10 years, and there may be some tragic that happens to you, like a Mack truck comes out of left field, that you didn't plan on. And that happens to all of us. Life has some random chaos to it. There's just no doubt about it. But I think if your mind is functioning and you're positive and you think you can deal with it, you can. Okay? So, that's the gist of what I'm saying today. I think you have a brain that is much more capable of taking care of you than you're giving it credit. And maybe it was designed by somebody 1,000,000 years ago on another planet someplace. Who cares? Okay? I think you need to take care of it. You need to do the natural kinds of things to take care of your body and your mind. You have to take care of how you structure it. I highly recommend that you learn to meditate. Meditation has been given a bad connotation by a lot of people, but most people that have structured mental abilities meditate. They have mindful control of their brain, and I think it's essential. I think we should be teaching it in elementary school. I think we should be teaching it in college. I think we should be teaching it in prisons. There's all kinds of examples of inmates being taught how to meditate, and they change completely. In fact, in a prison in Turkey, there was high violence all the time. They taught everybody to meditate. It got to a point where the guards didn't even have to have guns. Okay. It's also true that the studies have shown that if you meditate, and I'm not talking about, hopping on the floor or anything like that. I'm just talking about having a program that you structurally relax and think about things, that you can actually increase your scores on things like the GRE test. They've proven it. I think one group of students that meditated increased their average GRE scores by 16 points over a group that didn't meditate. I've seen examples of basketball players that were able to improve their basketball game by meditating. Golf players who can improve their swing by meditating. And so I think we have to give it some more consideration. I try to meditate. I use a very simple technique. It's not deep into the alpha like the transcendental meditation where it takes maybe 20 minutes to get down to the alpha level. I had a student 30 years ago teach me how to get down to the alpha level by using numbers and colors. It took about 10 minutes to get down there, but it is an altered state of consciousness when you're at that level and your mind is working different. You have alpha, beta, and theta waves in your brain, and you get down to that alpha level. You're very relaxed, but you're very aware of everything. But typically you have to have your eyes closed to do it. Now the way I do it, it's very closely related to how the ancient Egyptians, high priest, meditated. You have to relax your body. You have to deliberately, be in a relaxed state. However, you don't need to have your eyes closed, but in most cases I try to lay down to do this. And I imagine energy, and there's all kinds of energies around us. It's silly to think there's not. I mean, there's radio and TV and electromagnetic waves, and we can't touch them or see them, but I think there's also cosmic energy, okay? And when you get to a relaxed point, imagine willfully bring in that energy through the top of your head and let it just kind of float around, and then have it move through your body, and you can feel it as it goes through your arms, your body, your legs. And typically, a lot of natural medicine healers can actually pinpoint cancers in people by feeling the vibrations that they pick up off of these kind of energies. I think we're going to find all kinds of energies in the future that we don't know anything about today. I think there's energies between, planets and stars and galaxies, between galaxies in the universe. There's all kinds of energies. So we're still at that level 5 civilization, and we're pretty naive. But I think on your body level, you can be much smarter by accepting that there's energies around you, and you can bring them in, and you can do all kinds of things. I think you can lower a temperature, you can release gas in your stomach, you can cure a headache, you can, in maybe 10 minutes of meditation, get an equal to 2 hours of sleep, when you need an extra burst of energy, okay? I put my classes together this way. I relax, I go through, I visualize all of the issues that we want to talk about, or I want to talk about in class. I might have an hour and a half to do that. I put them in mental drawers and label them so that I don't use notes, just like I don't use notes or reading devices in these videos. I have it in my mind by these labels that I just constantly keep bringing up. And to be honest, I'm about at the end of those labels for this video, and I think it's time to wrap up. I would like to encourage you to learn how to control your mind, how to structure your mind, how to do mental coding of your own, and pat yourself on the back once in a while that you can do this. Okay, I think you can take on the toughest challenges and come out okay. And I think you can communicate with other people. We need other people. You need to be able to help other people. You need to take responsibility in your neighborhood and your community and your family. And I think you'll feel a lot better about yourself, okay? I believe that it's possible for everybody to have that. I don't see any limits on what your brain can do, what your mind can do, okay? So explore it, do some research, write me an interesting paper on it, okay? I'm anxious to see it. I wish you well. Thank you.